Hello and welcome to the Consistory of the coelc YouTube channel. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Jake Zabel of the St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church, located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia. Today we are going to wrap up my mini-series on Angelology by looking at my conclusion that I came to in my book, Choirs of Angels, a brief study on the kinds of angels. So when I began this series, I mentioned that historically the church has taught that there are 9 choirs of angels divided into 3 different triads. There are the seraphim, the cherubim, and the ophanim, who serve in the first triad as the heavenly servants. There are the dominions, the powers, and the virtues that serve in the second triad as heavenly governors, and there are the principalities, the archangels, and the archangels that serve in the third triad as the heavenly guardians of humans. I did also mention in previous videos how different church fathers held to different numberings of the different choirs of angels, such as St. Jerome, who held that there were only 7 choirs, and the Apostolic Constitution, which taught that there were 11 choirs. Throughout this mini-series on angelology, I've looked at all the different choirs mentioned in Scripture and in the Apostolic Constitution, and I've discussed my own opinions on this matter. Now, regarding how many types of angels there are, we do not have a definitive number. The Lutheran theologian Johannes Quinstead said regarding the 9 choirs of angels that there are definitively 9 choirs of angels, and that these are divided into 3 classes, which they call hierarchies. This we reject as uncertain and false. The main reason they did this is that Martin Luther and the other reformers taught that there is no definitive number of choirs of angels mentioned in Scripture. For all we know, there could be 1,000,000 different types of choirs. There could be 100 different types of choirs. We don't know exactly. All we know is that the Bible does mention different types of angels, such as the cherubim and the seraphim, the thrones, the powers, the principalities, etc. So the Bible does teach that there is these distinct different types or kinds or careers of angels, which we refer to as the different choirs of angels. How many choirs there are exactly, we do not know. All we know is that there are a bunch mentioned in Scripture. Historically, the church has taught that there are 9 choirs of angels, but as I mentioned in previous videos, I think that the choirs of wheels and thrones should be separated into 2 separate choirs. This would bring us up to 10. I also believe that the choir of watches, which is not included in the traditional 9 choirs, should be included in the list of choirs, so that would bring us up to 11 choirs. So here I'm just going to go through my conclusion that I came to in my book, discussing my own personal opinion on how many choirs of angels I believe. I should point out that this list of angels is not the official position of the coelc. It is not the official position of Lutheranism. It is an open question. We don't know how many different choirs of angels there are, and so all different Christians can have their own personal opinion as to how many choirs of angels they believe there are. This is just my personal opinion of how many angels I believe there are based on my interpretation of Holy Scripture. So regarding the choirs of angels, this is what we know from the Scriptures. We know 1, that angel is the term used for all the created beings of God. 2, that archangels are not necessarily their own separate choir or kind, but they are more of a rank of leadership angel. 3, that there are at least 3 choirs of angels in the Old Testament, the cherubim, the seraphim, and the ophanim or wheels, although there is the possibility that the cherubim and the seraphim could actually be referring to the same kinds of angels, just under different names. There is also a possible 4th choir of angels mentioned in the Old Testament, angels that take on a human-like appearance. There's also a 5th choir of angels mentioned in the book of Daniel, known as watchers. The New Testament gives us a list of angels known as the thrones, the principalities, the powers, the dominions, and the virtues, and possibly angels as a 6th distinct choir mentioned in the New Testament. It is unclear, however, whether these are all different choirs or whether they're just distinct careers. 5, it is also unclear whether there should be a distinct angel kind or whether this should just be the term for all angels. And 6, also, while church tradition associates the thrones with the wheels or omphanim, there is nothing in the text of Colossians to make this connection, and thus thrones and wheels are possibly different choirs. If we were to try and determine what are the different kinds of angels mentioned in the Bible, we could get possibly a list of 12. There are the cherubim, the seraphim, the omphanim or wheels, the principalities, the powers, the dominions, the virtues, the thrones, the angels, although in this case I'm talking about the messenger angels, the melachim. There are the watchers, there are the possibly the hosts, there are the horses of fire, and you could also chuck in archangels there as well. Thus, there are most likely at least 3 kinds or species of angels, and there are a possibility of up to 7 to 10 different kinds or careers of angels. It is very unlikely that there is an 11th or even 12th kind, but I'm just going to discuss what I call the Zabel list of the choirs of angels, and I'm going to give you my reasoning for this list, and then I'll give you my list. Personally, I believe that there is a choir of angels, or the Melachim, the messenger angels. I think that it is clear from Daniel that the watchers are their own distinct choir of angels. I don't see any reason to join the wheels and the thrones into a single choir, and so I'm happy to have them as their own separate choir. I do not think the hosts are a separate choir. I am confident that the eons or ages are not a choir of angels. I am not confident to include the horses of fire as their own separate choir, but I am not confident in ruling that out either. I do not believe that there is a choir of archangels, since I do believe, in agreement with Martin Luther and other reformers, that the Archangel Michael might actually just be a reference to the angel of the Lord, which is Jesus Christ. I do not believe that Gabriel is an archangel, or that Raphael or Uriel are archangels, if they even exist, since they are never called archangels either in scripture or in the Apocrypha. If there is a distinct group of angels known as archangels, whether that is 7 angels or more, I do not think that they are a separate choir, but that they are a group of leaders made up of angels from different choirs. And lastly, while I do like the Fisk theory that the cherubim and the seraphim could possibly be the same beings, I am quite comfortable sticking with the church tradition that the cherubim and the seraphim are separate choirs of angels. Therefore, this is the Zabel list of the choirs of angels. There are cherubim, seraphim, omphanim, melachim, principalities, authorities, dominions, powers, thrones, and watchers, and possibly horses of fire. That makes 11. If you chuck in the archangels as their own group that oversees all of these, then you do get 12 different types of angels. So technically, I would say that there are 10 choirs of angels, the archangels being their own group of angels distinct from the 10 choirs of angels, and then the horses of fire being some kind of subcategory of the choir of powers. And so if you buy my children's book on Choir of Angels, you'll see that I have divided the angels into different choirs based on my own interpretation and the Zabel list. So I begin the book by having the archangels as their own separate leadership group. I then proceed to have 10 different choirs of angels. The first tier being the cherubim, the seraphim, and the omphanim. The second tier being the dominions, the virtues, and the powers. And the third tier being the angels, the thrones, the principalities, and the watchers. The horses of fire are just included as a subcategory alongside the powers, not as their own separate choir. So in summary, I would interpret the scripture as saying there are 10 choirs of angels with a total of 12 groupings when you include the leader archangels and the subservient horses of fire. So that wraps up this long series on angelology. I hope you've enjoyed this series. If I would encourage you to go back and watch the entire series. And again, just remind people that a lot of this is speculation based on church tradition and my own personal interpretation. None of this should be taken as the official position of the coelc or Lutheranism. It is just my personal interpretation based on my reading of Scripture. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.